This month marks 50 years since the end of the Vietnam War.
The communist takeover of Saigon, the former capital of South Vietnam, put an end to nearly 20 years of U.S. involvement in that country.
And tonight, Tan Trung starts a series of reports focusing on the lives of Americans and Vietnamese 50 years later, beginning with the warriors.
At this year's Tet, or Lunar New Year celebration in New Orleans East, connections to Vietnam and the war which became synonymous with that country were very visible. Many here are Vietnamese refugees. Their children and grandchildren later became first-generation Americans. For those touched by the Vietnam War, a festival like this can be a reminder of the passage of time. The end of April marks 50 years since the end of the war.
Hard to imagine. Yeah, hard to imagine. Time passes fast, no doubt.
Robert Collins came to this festival to experience some of the Vietnamese culture that has seeped into New Orleans. He was a teenager during the controversial war, which involved America sending troops to South Vietnam with the goal of stopping North Vietnamese communist forces.
I had a couple of cousins that died in the war, and I know it was a very political war, no doubt about that, and the veterans from the war sure didn't get the recognition they needed.
I never even understood why we went.
Charlene Ellender is a New Orleans native.
That's just me in my different uniforms. That's right before I went. That's in San Antonio at Basic.
She studied nursing in college and enlisted in the Army. 6 months before graduation in 1968, she was commissioned as an officer. Shortly after, she got orders to head to Vietnam, a place Ellender admits she knew very little about.
I'm going to tell you, I was ignorant to what went on and anything about the war. He's my medic. They were from North Dakota.
By 1969, she was 22 years old and in Vietnam, a first lieutenant working with the 44th Medical Brigade.
And I served in 69, 70 at the 12th Tobacco Hospital in Cu Chi, South Vietnam.
Ellender says she knew she would witness pain and suffering, but it was often hard to stomach.
My first assignment was the emergency room. Everybody had to go through the emergency room. That was an eye-opener.
Ellender's second assignment was in the triage unit.
That's when I found out when those that were hopeless were put behind a curtain with a nurse to keep them comfortable and just let them go peacefully. That was hard.
The second night I was in Vietnam, my squad was attacked, and I lost one guy. He had his stomach blown open by a grenade.
Ellis Johnson is also from New Orleans. In 1964, at the age of 21, he began the first of 2 tours of duty in Vietnam with the U.S. Marines. Like Ellender, Johnson says he didn't know much about where he was headed.
When you got there, what were your thoughts?
My thoughts were do everything within my power to keep my other Marines safe. Because like I said, I was a squad leader and I was responsible for 12 people.
In Vietnam, Johnson says he had daily conversations with God.
I would pray to God all the time. God, you didn't put me over there to die in Vietnam. I would say that just about every day.
During his second tour, Johnson says a member of his squadron stepped on a landmine while on patrol. He says the blast knocked him out. When he regained consciousness, Johnson says his team was under fire.
They said the explosion flipped me over and went into my chest. And all I know when I woke up, bullets was bouncing around me. So I knew right away, don't move. I just stayed there. This was, my whole arm was blown open. You could see the bone. When I looked at it, you could see the bone, and they sewed this up. My chest, matter of fact, I had a piece of shrapnel in my chest just came out a couple of years ago.
Johnson was awarded a Purple Heart for his wounds. He left Vietnam in 1966. Ellender finished her deployment in 1970. The two are among the more than 2.5 million uniformed Americans who served in Vietnam between 1964 and 1975. More than 58,000 U.S. servicemen and women lost their lives in the war, 885 from Louisiana. their names etched into history and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Known simply as the Wall, it's a tribute to the American lives lost. The conflict came to an end when North Vietnam seized control of Saigon, the southern capital of Vietnam. American troops pulled out of the city on April 30th, 1975.
I guess I was sort of heartbroken that we gave in. I heard that if we had just stayed a little longer, that we would have won.
Was that a winnable war?
No, because you're fighting people in their backyard.
It's our first failure, our first true failure as a nation militarily and in nation building. It was, I think, a very noble experiment. I think it was done with good intentions all around, but at the same time, it proved our arrogance.
John Fitzmaurice is a history professor at the University of New Orleans and has taught courses on the Vietnam War. Fitzmaurice says the war caused many Americans to question their own government and its policies. But he says what should never be questioned is the valor of the veterans.
But what was the real tragedy of the soldiers coming home is that they were largely ignored.
The number of Vietnamese casualties is murky. In 1995, Vietnam released its official estimate: 4 million civilians killed countrywide, with 1.1 million Viet Cong soldiers dead. The U.S. military estimates more than 200,000 South Vietnamese troops who fought alongside Americans were killed. This spring, the American flag flew next to the old flag of South Vietnam. As part of its commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Fall of Saigon, the local Vietnamese community honored both U.S. and South Vietnamese veterans. The war may have ended 50 years ago, but for some veterans, they're fighting a different enemy today.
Didn't really start having any bad dreams initially till the 80s when I got married and my husband told me, "Would you fight the war in your sleep?"
I try not to think about Vietnam on a regular basis. Sometimes my mind is not thinking about Vietnam and boom, something will happen.
Johnson and Ellender say they're unsure what was gained in the war, but the losses are undeniable.
When I saw the way Saigon had fallen, I said that was a wasted war. I said, what did we die for? What did I bleed for?
A wasted war, wasted lives.
For many survivors, the end of the Vietnam War also set in motion a journey from Southeast Asia to Southeast Louisiana. Tomorrow night, in part 2, we'll take a look at how some Vietnamese refugees survived that journey to find a new home here in New Orleans.